webinar attendees. My name is Marisol Morales, and I serve as the Vice President for Network Leadership with Campus Compact. We hope that you and your families and communities are staying healthy and taking care of each other in this time. We want to begin with our land acknowledgement statement. As a step towards honoring the truth and achieving healing and reconciliation, Campus Compact seeks to acknowledge the traditional native lands on which we stand. Given that we are gathering for today's webinar from across the country and some from around the world, we invite you to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Native people where you are joining us from, and you can do that in the chat now. I myself am participating from Chicago, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox, have also called this area home. The region has long been a center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. Today, one of the largest urban American Indian communities in the United States resides in the city of Chicago. Members of this community continue to contribute to the life of the city and celebrate their heritage, practice traditions, and care for the lands and waterways. In addition, we also want to recognize and stand in solidarity with those individuals who are continuing to call for racial justice and equitable communities and affirm that Black Lives Matter. We commit to move beyond words into programs and actions that fully embody a commitment to full participation and equity. We're so happy to have you here today as part of the webinar titled Student Leadership in a Time of Global Crisis, From Ideas to Action for Full Participation in the 2020 Census and Elections. And such an imperative time this is for this topic. I'll be presenting I'll be introducing our presenters shortly, but first I have a few announcements for everyone. First, I just encourage people to check out our Campus Compact podcast, Compact Nation. We have our last or our final episodes for this season coming up in the next few weeks, and we'll begin season 5 of the Compact Nation podcast in October. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for season 5, please email us at podcast@compact.org. Again, for any ideas around podcasts or people who you think we should interview and chat with, or topics that you would like us to cover, you can email those suggestions at podcast@compact.org. Also, we'll be launching our fall webinar series in September, so just be on the lookout for the announcements for those webinars for the upcoming year. In addition, our Impact Awards nominations are open, and they'll be open from now and through September 15th. So you can check out compact.org to find out more information and nominate folks as well as institutions. One more thing, it is renewal season, and so just want to encourage folks to make sure that your institution renews its membership with Campus Compact, or if you're not a member and interested in becoming a member, feel free to reach out to me at mmorales@compact.org, and I can provide you with more information about how to be a Campus Compact member. Our ability to bring you relevant programming and support relies on institutional memberships. So it's really important to make sure that we get those memberships in. So now let me introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Aaliyah McLean, and she's a Community Engagement and Outreach Fellow at the James Madison Center for Civic Engagement. She's a 4th-year student studying media arts and design with a concentration in journalism at James Madison University. Along with her major, she double minors in both sociology and political communications. In addition to her studies, Aaliyah is the president of the Student Government Association at JMU and a Campus Compact Newman Civic Fellow. She was the revitalizing president of Women of Color in 2017 and 18, a spring 2018 initiate of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and a council member on the Women of Madison Council. In her free time, Aaliyah loves to watch movies, shop locally, and spend time outside. Next, we have Ethan Gardner, who is the Virginia State Politics Fellow for the James Madison Center for Civic Engagement. He's a recent graduate in political science with a minor in public policy and administration and honors interdisciplinary studies. In addition to his work with the center, he is chair of the Legislative Affairs Committee for the JMU Student Government Association and a brother of the Phi Alpha Delta Pre-Law Fraternity. And finally, we have Dr. Carl Ongwele, who's the Associate Director of the James Madison Center for Civic Engagement at James Madison University, where she works in partnership with students, faculty, staff, and community partners to embed civic learning and democratic engagement across campus through curricular and co-curricular programming. CARA has developed innovative pedagogy melding scholarship and experiential learning to teach courses on civic engagement, campaigns and elections, and state and local politics. At the heart of her research interests is a desire to understand and illuminate how the interactions of political actors and institutions structure public access and participation in policy and decision-making processes. Her dissertation explored the politics of cleaning up the environmental contamination that resulted from the testing, development, and production of nuclear weapons, with a focus on the role of community-based groups in developing expertise and engaging in the public in policy and decision-making processes. Cara has previously worked at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics and in the Governing American and Global Era GAGE program at the Miller Center for Public Affairs. From 1999 to 2012, she worked on as a research and program director for non-governmental organizations on nuclear and security issues and traveled around the world to engage with communities on these issues. Cara holds a PhD in American government and an MA in Foreign Affairs from the University of Virginia. Recent research and publications include American Government, Roots and Reforms, co-authored with Dr. Larry Spotto on political parties, campaigns, elections, and voting and the media. With Dr. Walter Hynek, she is co-editing a new book series on research and global civic engagement. So welcome to our presenters, and I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you so much, Marisol. I wonder if we could go ahead and we thought we would just ask a couple of questions to start us off. So we're just going to do some quick polls that hopefully popped up in your screen. I'll stop the share for just a second so you can see those. First, if you could let us know, does your campus plan to open and have in-person activities for this fall? A second question we're interested in hearing before we start to present is whether or not you have students that are currently engaged in your election or census planning and engagement efforts. And then finally, if you would take a moment to just answer some of the greatest challenges, or which of the following represents the greatest barrier to election and census engagement on your campus or in your community. That may be a lack of institutional support. So perhaps this isn't an administrative priority, for example. Another, is it a lack of capacity or resources within your institution? So there might be a desire, but just not the resources or capacity. And then a third one that we often hear, that's where we did these multiple choice, is concern that such efforts might be partisan in nature. So today we've, if you'd like to follow along yourselves in the PowerPoint, you're welcome to do that. And we've also put notes into our PowerPoint that you can access along with some of the direct resources that we'll be mentioning. I'll also put in some, you'll see a census specific folder in that bit.ly, which will take, the bit.ly will take you to a G drive. I'll put that bit.ly in the chat box as well. The bit.ly will take you to a G drive folder that has the presentation and some resources specifically that we're addressing today, and also our entire census engagement portfolio in case it's helpful to see. And we're happy to add some of our elections portfolio into this as well. So the first thing we're just going to be talking, just to give an overview, our plan at JMU is to have a plan, but to be flexible, particularly in this environment. And really we see students as the co-creators and facilitators Our plan for 2020 began, Ethan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our plan for 2020 actually started in November of 2018, the day after the 2018 election, and has been something that we've been continually developing and contributing to. I think it reached over 30 single-spaced pages in a Google Doc, because we would have, all of our students would have ideas as we were engaging, and we would think about what are the next steps that we should be taking to further along our plan. So our plan is in that G Drive folder that I mentioned and pictured here, but just a couple of quick highlights of what we're thinking about specifically around the 2020 elections, which is coming up, and are continuing to develop a partnership with our local registrar and the Board of Elections. So we regularly attend meetings, both myself and students, and have that ongoing contact. This is really important because those registrars serve our students, but also because of the perception, if we try to work, the working with them, really kind of de-emphasize the partisan nature of this kind of work. So we are absolutely committed to nonpartisan voter registration, and working with with our registrar has really helped show that we're not in this because we have any quotas to fill, but we're really want to work with them and be part of the educational process. We're not trying to sway elections one way or the other, and we're very intentional, about educating about the different choices that students have and taking them through the process, and trying to lift the burden off of our local registrar and Board of Elections. We also will be talking a little bit more about this, but developing nonpartisan materials in modules that can be used on course instructional kits. And we did that for the census and are doing that also for the election this year. We're going to get into that a little bit more during this presentation. Also building voter registration and education into our orientation for new students. And we're going to talk about, Aaliyah's going to talk about that next, actually, and what works and what didn't this week, because this week was actually our programming for that. Creating materials, especially for notoriously low voting turnout rates. For us, it's our business students and our STEM students, and then also using data for our campus to think about how we can build alliances and partnerships with different demographics across campus to ensure that we have full inclusion. And full participation, and especially from traditionally minoritized or marginalized, underserved, and underrepresented communities. We are especially excited this year about a new partnership with athletics, and we're going to be having a new student democracy fellow who's on the women's basketball team joining our team and leading voter registration efforts among athletics. And so that's an exciting development for us this year. We're also partnering with Greek Life, and especially in the time of COVID and uncertainties about whether or not we're going to be in person or online, and how direct service might impact organizations such as community service learning and then Greek and sorority life. We're incorporating voter and census education and engagement as community service hours this year. So this is a new development and really exciting way to expand these efforts. Finally, and Aaliyah is going to talk about our alternative break initiatives and working with our community partners and students to develop nonpartisan voter education along with our various media outlets, both on and off campus, as well as virtual programming to connect issues that students care about to why voting and the census matters. So we'll be getting into each of these things a little bit more in depth, and Aaliyah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kara. It's great to be with you all today. And so really kind of what Kara said, we were very intentional about who can we connect with this year and who can really spread an outreach to. And something that really hit us was like, yes, we want our students to really vote on campus, to expose what we kind of emphasize, and we kind of have this community name for ourselves. And so we said, why not meet them for where they are when they first get into JMU. And so this immediately is orientation. And so this is, for JMU, we take our orientation very seriously around here, which is a really big joke of we have a week long full of programming, and then they also have individual days in June and July where they get ready to come to JMU. And so orientation here is about a 1 to 2 month process. And so we were saying, what is a better way than to just connect with them there? So when they aren't even at JMU yet, they know who we are. So when they get here, they'll be more engaged, more excited, and ready to really get involved in elections and different things that they really care about. And so as you all know, programming has been a really key component to meet students because it engages them, it entertains them, and also finds a way to create an excitement out of things that they may have not thought about before. And so especially with virtual programming now, you're able to really meet students where they are. You're able to just join a webinar from your bed. If some of you are doing that from your coffee table, from a coffee shop, you don't physically have to be in the same place to do virtual programming anymore, which really helps you because you're able to reach new communities and new people in a very intentional way. And so this also then allows people to rewatch things and things like that. And so we were very excited about the virtual programming that we've been doing during COVID, but also especially with orientation. And so our ideas for this was, what is a way to really enhance students to understand what is their civic agency and why do elections and civic participation and democracy really matters, and why do they care about that? And so we were saying, what is a better way than to connect their passions that they have in their life to issues we have in our community, to really kind of enhance the civic motivation there. And so we did a lot of programming to really tie in what is their greater responsibility, especially as a new student to JMU, getting to know the Harrisonburg community. Where do you really want to invest your passions, and how will you go about this? And so we did this by helping them connect those passions, but then creating a civic action plan so they can tangibly kind of put down what are their goals, what they want to see, and what can they measurably say they kind of put into while their time at JMU. And so this is really great for us. We're really excited, and we just new students would love this idea. And then in these trainings, again, we would end it with voter registration. So to put that action piece of you care about this, you're passionate about this, here's your why, your what, and now here's your how. And you're going to vote, and we're going to register you now, and you're going to understand the importance of getting involved in a new community. These things are all really great and they sound awesome, but what's important about when you talk about virtual programming, we talk about the successes so much and the pros, that we really want to emphasize the lessons we've learned from them, and some things that we now know as we prepare for more virtual programming. And so with this program, with orientation, our intentional plan was at first to maybe have about, we didn't know how many people we would have about first years, but we had orientation peer advisors who are their one-on-one direct advisors with us as well to kind of create that better influence, because students are more likely to listen to other students and people that look like them and that they can understand with and have more empathy with. And so we had OPAs lined up to do breakout sessions through Zoom, just like today. But unfortunately, because of registration and advertising, we did not get the numbers that we kind of hoped for and thought about. And so this is really important when you are thinking about virtual programming, is to come up with a plan B, but also when you are working with different partners in your community and on campus, really ask them, what can we do to really emphasize this to make this important, so we can make sure we have these numbers in place, so we can make sure we have the community, because unfortunately our intent was there, but our impact, we didn't get to do exactly what we wanted to do. And so luckily, it's really important to have a plan B. So we immediately said, okay, no students were registered the day before. We had about 2 or 3. And we were, yes, disappointed, but we said, how can we still maximize this? How can we still meet students and still connect with them and really still help them find this? And so we, as you see here, we streamed it online. So it had up to 512 views, and that was as about 2 days ago. So we just did it this week. So it could be up more now. And then we also did 3 different times. And so we streamed it at those 3 different times, 11, 3, and 7. So whatever they were doing, they can go back on there and look, but it also kept popping up on their timeline throughout the day. And so we still did that, and we still made it work, but it's really important to emphasize when you're working with different community partners, really sit down and talk about your goals together and say, how can we make sure that we meet that impact, and how can we make sure that we are doing these things? And so it definitely was a great idea. We love the intent, and it's still, the programs are amazing. And then we're excited now for the future, because now we know what things we want to do and those lessons that we learned in advance. So definitely really think about those things prior to planning your program, to make sure everyone's kind of able to do these things so you can meet that impact that you all really want. And something that also is really cool is at JMU, we have a program called Alternative Breaks, which most universities do under the National Nonprofit Breakaway. And so we also have a partnership with them now, is they have moved their new Dukes, which is first years and transfers, alternative break, which is a service trip for those that may not be familiar, online this year. And so they're doing that in their office and apartment over there. And now we're able to now go in and actually use the presentation that we did this week with orientation for that group as well. And so we know we'll have about 20, 30 people. It'll be tomorrow, and we'll be able to still go through this idea of getting involved in community building and civic engagement with them tomorrow. And so creating these platforms have been so important to create these new collaborations that you were able to do before, but now in a more intentional way. But when you are thinking about these partnerships and programs, really do think about what could go wrong, though you don't want it to go wrong. What could happen so you're prepared and you already know before. We're a very group of very on-the-fly thinkers. We're just very, sometimes we'll just get it done. We're determined, but sometimes it can be very shocking and sometimes it can be disappointing. So use that to kind of grow from that and say, what can we still do to meet that impact? What can we still do to meet students? So that we directly didn't get to interact with that many students and do voter registration in the way we intended to, we still know from that one video, as of 2 days ago, we had reached 512 views in that moment. And so now we're able to reshare that as we move forward and really move on. And so it was awesome, but think about those trials and tribulations as you do these things and as you reach new groups and new communities.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, and going off of what Aaliyah has been talking about in terms of building up plan A, plan B, plan C, plan anything, continually being ready for wrenches to be thrown in all of your plans and ideas. Wanted to talk briefly about the process of building engagement plans for voting, and it's very relevant for the census as well. Right now, with the way the world is, the way that everything is, I imagine at many universities, still uncertain about what fall plans will look like, constant changes in voting. There's a lot of things in flux when it comes to how the election in 2020 will run. There's so many elections on the ballot, from the presidential level all the way down to a lot of state and local elections. And it's really important that young people are educated and aware of what the process actually looks like this year. There was a really great study survey done by a partnership between Gallup and Circle at Tufts University. They published a big study on students, on youth engagement and youth learning, and youth voting, and they found a lot of really interesting results. But one of the points they emphasize is that students are extremely engaged right now. Students, young people are extremely engaged. Young people are the ones that are in the streets protesting, trying to make positive change and everything. But one of the barriers in place is that a lot of young people are not as aware or not as firmly aware of how to vote this year, of election processes. There were a number of questions asking about students being aware of, asking about online voter registration and how they would be able to get absentee ballots or vote by mail. And there were significant numbers of young people that weren't able to accurately identify that information. And colleges are really set up well to fill that void, to really fill that gap and provide that information. But that information needs to be accurate and needs to be figured out proactively sooner than later. So when you're looking at your college, really take a look at your state laws and identify what are the registration processes this year. Do you have online voter registration? If your state does have online voter registration, it can be pretty easy to meld that into classrooms this upcoming year. Even if it's virtual, you can add those voter registration links. Nationwide, there's a big lag in registration numbers from years past, and that's something that's going to be really problematic when we get closer to the general election, if students are having to update voter registration last minute and figure out how to vote. Also this year, there's been a lot of expansion in terms of vote by mail options, but one thing we have to consider is that, especially in states that are expanding their vote by mail options, these are very new processes that haven't been run by election offices as largely in the past, and students haven't used as often as in the past. So we really need to be prepared to be showing students how to get from this point A to requesting your ballot through the whole process of getting your ballot received and counted in the election. For example, in Virginia, we've had a huge number of reforms that went into effect for our voting laws, and one of those was no excuse absentee. And so it's a great step forward in voting access, but it's also a potential for confusion among students and among young people of how to actually access that and how to go through the process of getting your ballot and making sure it's returned on time so that it can actually be counted. So getting all this information figured out early and having contingency plans for how to deal with how you're going to get students accessing the ballot, if they're all in person, if you have students, if you go to a virtual, if your university is going virtual, there's a good chance students may be staying home possibly. That could mean that maybe they're not at the place where they're currently registered. Do you have a plan to reach students where they are and help make those changes happen and help students get their registration changed? So it's all those different contingencies that really vary by campus and by your student population that need to be really well considered. And then most importantly, you need to make sure students are in the room for these discussions and for the outreach about this information. So some things that the JMU that we have done with the Center for Civic Engagement is constantly having an updated webpage with all of the information about voting and elections in Virginia, locally and elsewhere, and how to access those things. We use our social media platforms to spread information. This graphic that's on screen here, the What's New with Virginia Voter Laws, that refers to the big set of laws that went into effect on July 1st in Virginia. That changed many laws, including our photo ID requirements, changes in vote by mail, changes in many other aspects of voting. And so spreading information via social media, through emails and communications with students, going to student organizations. We have many democracy fellows in the office that are part of many different parts of our campus, and that's deliberate so that we can reach as many different areas of campus as possible. And then other creative ways include utilizing the podcast that the Center for Civic Engagement runs. A month or so ago, we had an interview with a state senator on some of the the changes in voting laws in our state, and that was a great opportunity to hear from elected officials and folks that actually changed those laws about the effects of that on students and on the Commonwealth. And so having all of that proactive research done and including students during the whole process of developing that is extremely important to make sure that you're prepared for all the contingencies that could happen this year, because 2020 is going to be a huge election, and there are so many different ways that this election will be extremely different with the pandemic and with the political environment we have right now.
Thank you, Ethan. There was a good question that I'll just go ahead and address while we're on this. Someone asked about our thoughts on helping students change their voter registration to campus versus absentee voting in their home state. This is something that is going to be particularly challenging this year because some more students may be doing distance learning depending on campus plans to reopen. Our position has been, that we want to educate students about the choices that they have. It may be easier for students to register and vote in their home districts where their parents are, or they may feel more tied to that community. And that could be the case, irregardless of COVID. Some, want to join at the campus precinct, for example, if your campus has a precinct, or kind of go with their friends. For many students, this is going to be their first time voting, and especially in a presidential election year. So we just try to educate about the choices that students have, and then give them the options. And especially right now, talking about mail-in and or absentee voting. That's been one of the that is that is going to continue to be a major challenge throughout this process, and not all states. I think only a new report out from the National Conference on Citizenship just this week says that only 19 states are really prepared for having an election during the pandemic. So I would really encourage you to look at what your states and localities are doing and how your communities are preparing. And again, work with your local registrar's office if you can. Right now, get in touch with them if you're able to just kind of see like what will make this what's the best options for them, and how do we educate and facilitate. I know right now our registrar's office, we're accepting voter registration, and I have to call ahead of time to make sure that somebody's going to be there to make sure that we can deliver the registration forms. So there's just additional barriers this time around. Whether it's paper or even online, but making sure that you have those local deadlines and that students are aware. And I think, this is really one of those things where it's context specific and a conversation, what makes most sense in the community in which you're situated. Again, for us, it has to be about educating, because we don't want to be perceived as trying to sway an election one way or the other. It can be a lot easier for students to vote locally, but they may not feel those ties. So we're not trying to push one thing or the other, but to educate them and help them work through, what is it that they would like to do? Where is it that they feel the most affinity? What are the issues that they care about? And then how can they make a difference? And that may change from year to year, right? In Virginia, we have elections every single year, and we have multiple elections every single year because of primaries and local elections. I think we've already had, Ethan, have we already had 4? I think we've already had 4 elections in Virginia this year. We haven't even gotten to November yet, right? And so some students wanted to vote in, the primaries in their home district, and are now, we need to remind them to check their registration and make sure they're updated to vote where they want to vote for the fall. So it's just that constant reminder and showing them how they can go through that process and giving them the space to do that. As Aaliyah mentioned, we know from best practices that and from initiatives that making sure that we have time, dedicated time to walk students through that process is the most beneficial for the students, and that can be through orientation. Our Office of Disability Services is also trained, and they walk through students who use their services with voter registration as well. So it's a non-pressure environment where it's educational. And then we also do classroom visits. That has been a really key best practice at JMU, and we'll talk a little bit more about that moving forward. I think part of making sure, I know many, I see some friends on the call who already know about NSLVE, but just as a reminder and perhaps an introduction for those who may have not heard of it, this is the national study on student learning, voting, and engagement that's produced by the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education at Tufts University. So not everybody knows who at their university might have this. And so that's one of the key things, is to figure out who at your university receives this. But having this data is really important for figuring out what are those low propensity majors, and how is voting done by race and ethnicity, so that we can make sure that we are inclusive and reaching out to ensure that everyone's voice is heard in that process. For us, it's STEM majors and business majors. And so this graphic here shows how last year a student in the College of Business produced this. Piper put together reasons why, as a business major, she thought voting was important. And this was distributed to her peers in College of Business and put on all of the screens. There was also a fun Halloween version of this, that related to, what spooky is not voting, or something, it was something kitschy or punny, and these ran on screens all throughout the College of Business, but to kind of link like why students in that major should really care. And we're doing some things very similar this year with STEM majors. We're in the process of producing reasons why engineering should care, reasons why chemistry should care, and there's other initiatives. And then finally looking at our demographic data, thinking about, okay, among these groups, how can we make alliances with organizations for us through our Center for Multicultural Student Services, and other affinity groups? How can we partner with them and go to them? And, you know, we're not asking them to come to us. We try to go to where their organizations are, and try to partner with them, not just on voting and say we want to come in and register to vote, but also show up for their events. And so that has been really important for us, is to show up for those students, to let them know that we care about the issues that they care about.
It sounded like.
Thank you, Kara. And she said it so well at that last point, especially showing up for those groups outside of just asking them to register to vote and to work with our office, but really establishing that trust and that community between them, like creating those relationships really help. Because as we're going to talk about now, is like this Canvas module. So when people see our names, Duke's Vote, Center for Civic Engagement, it's like that trust and compassion that's already there because the relationships we built with those communities. And so something that we do also to really meet and match and target students is we have Canvas modules. So depending on what your school uses, Canvas, or a lot of schools use Blackboard, an online kind of system where they can see all their classes and coursework. We have partnered as well to get like a little, as you see where the mouse is, an attention, like attention JMU students, are you counted? And this was extremely important with this year, with the 2020 census, because on Census Day, we were all displaced because of COVID. And students still counted where their institution was. And so it was so important to really spread that outreach and engagement there, because students, at this point, we weren't able to just see them on the, what we call the quad, see them and say, hey, are you counted? Get counted today, fill this form out for your roommates. We were still able to meet them where they were because you're logging into your Canvas, your educational material at least once a week. Depending on your students, some every day, just depends on the student, we knew they would see it. And so by having that, it's like that instant reminder, but then also when they see our names, it's that instant trust, that instant face-to-face communication that isn't directly there, but they'll see. And so I know a lot of people said, how are you navigating making forms available, just even in these aspects of putting it where they'll see it, and also on our webpage. And so as you see there, it also has a link to our site and things like that. And so they can directly just click on it. It's so easy right then and there. It's very convenient to them. And so we also partnered up with the registrar's office, and we have something called My Madison, which is basically our kind of online enrollment, place to see your classes, all those things. We also partnered there and had a box there as well saying, are you counted? And we plan on doing that as well for the upcoming elections as well. And so just these instant convenient reminders for students really helps them, and also helps build that trust, that connection, and reminder. Something we also do is just create PowerPoints and videos that kind of emotionally connect with students. So as you see, I Vote Because is a kind of video we did last year, and I'm pretty sure the year before that, where it just says, I vote because. And I see we were on the quad one day as well. We do a lot of tent talks. You can see right there in that picture, someone said why they voted. And so there's those communication between students of the influence they have, but also seeing what matters to you and knowing that everyone can have a different reason why they vote, but we also vote. And we're all united, and we're also a community. And so that really helps create that kind of communication, that community building, and that trust for them really to see, wow, I really want to vote, and I also want to encourage other people to vote because this is our right, this is our privilege. And so knowing that is so important as well. We also do virtual class visits. So as classes have went online, even popping in on a Zoom, it takes literally in person, takes about 10 to 15 minutes, but not just telling people to register to vote, actually doing it right there and then with them. And so you know it actually is going to get done. They see how quick and easy it is, updating the form if they moved around, and they have a new address locally, but so quick, just meeting them where they are. And so you can just pop into a Zoom, introduce who you are, and then quickly maybe do a presentation, but just say, here's the online registration link, and just wait there with them while they do that. See if they have any questions, see what you can do, and that way they also see your face. So if they ever see you around again, it's that trust and communication that they can come talk to you about anything, ask you, because again, like we said, we're nonpartisan. And so we really just want to encourage students to vote, and we really emphasize Duke's vote. And so also then asking though faculty and students to do presentations, because again, when they hear a presentation and just another student from a faculty or someone that they actually trust, it builds that more empathy there. And so this makes it very emotional and very personal. So then voting to them becomes a very personal thing that they really love, they're really engaged into. And so trying to do these community partnerships and relationships are so important for our office. And when you are doing this work, because then it not just becomes your motto and mission, it becomes everyone's motto and mission, that we all really want to be engaged. We all want to encourage people to vote. And so really combining in on these conveniency, relationship, and community building when you are asking people, why do you vote, and what matters to you, and how can we make sure that we ensure everyone is counted in our census and things like that on campus.
Yeah, and going off of all of that, one of the big initiatives that the center has consistently done for several years now is having the idea of connecting issues to processes. Elections, voting, the census, these don't happen in a vacuum. People don't just go to vote for no reason. There are many, many public issues that students, that young people connect to their motivation to go vote. So we really emphasize the importance of talking about actual public issues, ones that are national in scope, some that are local in scope, things that are affecting our campus specifically. And so before the pandemic, we would run events we called tent talks. And the slideshow is a picture of one right here, where we would set up a tent on the quad. It's the biggest traffic area on our campus with lots of students coming through. And then we would pick topics that day to discuss. So some of them include immigration, racial justice. One day was a big one on the census. We did one that was discussing a question prompt that was, what is my responsibility to dismantle racism? And that generated huge amounts of discussion among students. And we had note cards for students to fill out about what they thought and their responses to that question. But most importantly, it's about bringing in really important public issues to be right in front of students. And meeting students where they are, and being recognizing that there are a lot of students that are extremely passionate, but there are also a lot of students that maybe don't know about a specific issue, and using it as an opportunity to educate and meet students where they are and generate that discussion of what is going on in the world, what is this public issue, and then how does that connect to who you vote for and voting in a specific election, whether it's a local election or a federal one. And since February and March, we have shifted a lot of that work to be doing work with events with the same principles and with the same strategies, but virtually. So running events on our public Facebook pages, Zoom events that we advertise in advance, and talking about relevant public issues. We did, the center hosted one about policing locally, with bringing in the local police chief, other racial justice related issues. It's really important, I think, that you look not only to the big national talking point issues, but also to what's going on your campus. Like, what are your students actually talking about? If you go on Twitter or wherever, and consider productively discussing issues related to what's going on, and really importantly, building action into those discussions, because right now, there can be sometimes a tendency to talk about an issue, but then also building into that, what are resources students can take advantage of going forward if a particular discussion really influences them. and how can students go forward and really get involved in that specific issue. And so when we're building these events, we really put an emphasis on rigorous research and building primers for these events. We usually task a few students with help from faculty and make sure that we have usually a primer that goes with these events that is published beforehand, so students can look and get a sense of what are the relevant terms and information that's cited and backed up by academic sources, not just what people think. And then when we're moderating these discussions, being very, very, very cognizant of who we're inviting to speak at these events and who we're inviting to moderate these, making sure we have issue experts, making sure we have diverse voices that are included in every step of the planning process, not just to speak, but also in the planning of everything. And also and going through all of this, so being very cognizant of reaching students where they are and building an academic educational perspective into all of the work we're doing. And something else that we have run often in the past is what we call our traveling town halls, where we bring local elected officials or candidates that are running for local, state level, even federal office. We bring them. In the past, we have brought them to residence halls to speak to our students. So last year we had a House of Delegates race, so we brought the Democrat and the Republican that were running for the House of Delegates to come to 3 residence halls and speak on the issues that they were running on in that election. And it was a really great event, something we've done each semester. We've done in person, and then since the pandemic and everything has moved online, we've hosted elected officials at events online. So still bringing relevant candidates, public officials to students to talk about what they are running on, what they are doing in office, and utilizing the virtual platforms that allow us to reach sometimes even more students and more people than an in-person event would allow us. I believe this past week we had an event where the mayor of Harrisonburg spoke briefly about her experiences and everything. And so really taking advantage of those digital options that are available, and connecting these important big issue ideas like high voter turnout with what are the everyday actions that these elected officials you vote for actually doing, and are they actually working for you? We're giving a platform for students to ask questions openly. That's what could generate some productive work on those mobilization and motivation gaps that you see sometimes. So really, when students are able to see why all these issues that are affected by who and what they vote for, it can really help with making that persuasive argument about why students should be updating the registration and ready to vote. And so that's just a few things, and we, just like anyone else, are trying to adapt as best as possible to replicate the same what we have seen to be successful strategies virtually. And not everything works perfectly. We've had to retool things a couple times and had some different ideas. But I think the important thing is that just always working at it and always attempting.
Ethan, if it's okay if I just add on a couple of things to that too. Our podcast has also been a great means, and our students are involved in research and interviewing for our podcast, which has been a great way to highlight some of the work that's happening both at our university, but also externally. And I know, for example, we did one interview that I'll post a link to with Dia Abdu, who is a recipient of a Campus Compact Award, I believe either last year or the year before, about every campus a refuge, but using our podcast as a means to create educational modules with discussion questions. And we've also prepared some on voting and voting rights, but linking issues that faculty can use in classrooms and student organizations can use to learn about an issue and then to engage in discussions around them. One of our favorite stories to tell, we had a group of students from UC San Diego come spend a week with us last year as their alternative break. And we did a tent talk on immigration. And the question that the students came up with to pose, we popped up the tent just like you see in this picture out on the quad. And so lots of students pass by during the lunch hour, and we'll often have pizza or cupcakes or something out there to draw people. But the question on the whiteboard that day wasn't 2020 census, as you see on the board in this picture, but the question was, have you thought about your citizenship status today? And a student walking by saw it and said to us, not until now. And then came and had a full-on conversation, about immigration issues. And so trying to really draw people in a space that they might not necessarily be expecting it. I love that story because it highlights how we can really bring people in and have conversations and create public squares where we can talk about some of these controversial issues, but in a respectful way. Somebody asked a question about getting students off campus counted, and I just wanted to say that many of these strategies that you're hearing about for our voter plan, we applied to our census efforts. And Aaliyah and Ethan, please feel free to jump in on this. We produced a 2020 census engagement plan. Again, a lot of it was disrupted by COVID because a lot of our in-person programming was set to take place as soon as we returned from spring break, but we never returned from spring break. But that being said, we had reached out. Our next slide, we'll talk about developing an inclusive coalition, but as part of our coalitional plan for the 2020 census, we had reached out to our libraries, which runs Canvas, our instructional kit, and we'd reached out to the registrar's office. And so we had already planned to have global alerts in our course registration system so that when students logged in to register for fall courses, they would see an alert to complete the census with a direct link to the census portal. They also saw an alert, it was on I can go back up to a previous slide. It was on a previous slide that you saw. Oh, there it was. This was an alert that, and this is in our census folder that's on the G drive shared with you all. We had an alert on the top of the Canvas so that every time a student logged in, they got a reminder. We also took screenshots of our response rate when these ran, so we could see the numbers. We were able to see numbers go up as these alerts went out and when they were timed. What we had not planned but were able to do because of COVID was to do a course-wide text message. And that text message was very similar to what this Canvas alert says, just at the beginning. Even if you're not in Harrisonburg, you still need to use your off-campus address to complete the census. So that's really how we got, we are currently beating our 2010 numbers, which I'm happy about, but we're not at full participation yet in the census. The downside of COVID is that, we had this amazing programming where, we were going to have Talk About It Tuesday to talk about the census, and we were going to do class visits on the census, because just like voting, it's an educational process. These students most students don't know what the census is, why it's important for our democracy, for our economy, for local communities. So again, that being able to have that FaceTime and to be able to talk about why it's important really matters. And also we know from research that if people understand the process and why it's important, they're more likely to fill it out. My biggest concern with this year, in addition to questions about how minoritized communities are going to be affected, which is something that we can talk about if there's questions on that about the census specifically, is that if we don't do this educational piece for students, it's also going to affect census responses in 2030, right? Because if they don't have this experience now, we know that they're going to be less likely to fill it out in 2030 as well. So we really, our organizations and our universities really have a public responsibility on this. The good news is, if your community is worried about an undercount, The census announced in mid-June that they have given every single college and university the option of turning over e-records, which is in compliance with FERPA. So now all colleges and universities can turn over directory information, which only includes 3 data points: date of birth, name, and off-campus address. So that while that had just previously been a possibility for residence halls and group quarters enumeration, that is now something that campuses can provide for every single student. So I think that's really helpful. At the same time, that only deals with the count question. It doesn't deal with the demographic questions, which is what cities, counties, state governments, businesses, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations really need that demographic data that students would fill out to help with decision-making and planning. I know we're getting close on time, so I'll just very quickly say, we really want to make sure that we work in partnership across the university, and we're really grateful for building a coalition, an intentional coalition that includes faculty, media. I think one of the things that our Student Government Association, both of which Ethan and Aaliyah were leaders in, and particularly this year where service hours are needed by student organizations, it's a prime opportunity to focus on offering census completion, getting others to complete the census, voter registration, voter education as an opportunity for service this year. We also partner with our student newspaper, Breeze and Breeze TV. We have planned an election night party that hopefully will take place. We're going to have to come up with an alternative for that, and also presidential debate watch parties that will broadcast online and try to bring people in to watch parties, at least virtually, to help raise awareness and also include discussion with that. So we can move on to breakout rooms. Ethan, do you want to lead us off here?
Sure. Yeah. And one of the biggest thing I think everyone's kind of aware of right now is just the political environment being so tough. But we just don't think that should be a discouragement for work that like this that we're all doing. So it just takes being a little more intentional about the activities that we develop, the programs we put forward, and really taking into account the political environment and being hyper aware of what's going on in the world. We really think it's important, though, that we lean into the politics of everything. We are nonpartisan. We do not advocate for any specific political agenda or party or politician or anything like that. But there is relevant information we need to talk about, and we talk about we bring up any kind of public issue, whether it's healthcare access, whether it's racism in society, whether it's environmentalism, any other issue that we have events and programming on. I mean, these are politically charged topics with people with political opinions on both ends, but there's also scientific understandings that undergird all of these issues, academic understandings. So it's really, really important that focusing on building a constructive environment to understand these, to discuss these issues, and leaning in to data, to research when building plans, and things will get messy. So I think it's important that when putting these kinds of events together, dialogues, recognizing that students will get uncomfortable, and to an extent that's perfectly fine. And when it comes down to it also, we really lean into putting together these primers. I discussed them briefly earlier on a previous slide, but before we have any events and dialogues on topics, we develop a primer that's put together by students and with faculty perspectives too, to generate a shared understanding before we approach a topic, because we can't assume every student will understand every single aspect of an issue. So when approaching an issue, make sure we define terms, make sure we define concepts before going in, so we understand. We come in with a shared understanding of everything. We put together some anti-racism resources before some of our events earlier the past couple of months, just so we have better understandings when talking about these really tough issues. But while it's difficult, it shouldn't be a discouraging factor. It just means that we should be more prepared for these discussions going forward.
So we have enough time. Oh, Ethan, somebody had a question about poll workers. I wonder if you want to talk about that really quickly.
Sure. Yeah. Let me see. Let me pull up the question.
I'm wondering if you can just speak about students being poll workers. It was my question for elections, especially during COVID.
Yeah, that's something. I was a poll worker in the primary elections, and I know in Virginia specifically, I believe the governor of Virginia actually put out a specific call for young people, because traditionally a lot of the poll workers are traditionally a lot of the elderly and retired folks, folks that are more at risk now with the pandemic. So there has been a push, I know, in Virginia to have more students as poll workers. And one thing a lot of to know is that you get compensated for your day at the poll. So if you are a poll worker, you can get paid a small stipend of money for that day of work. But it's something I definitely think that students should definitely consider, because when it comes down to, there's vote by mail options being expanded in certain states. It really varies on the state, but the fact is there is going to be a general election on Tuesday, November 3rd, and keeping precincts open really depends on the local registrars having the staffing to keep all of those offices open. They need actual people in each of these precincts to have to run all the machines and check people in and everything. And we really want to avoid what we've seen in some other states where precincts and where polling stations have shut down. Often those shutdowns happen in marginalized communities, and that's even worse. So I think it's really important that all of those get staffed. So it is an opportunity for students. And I've seen there's been some nonpartisan groups that have gotten started to start recruiting students for working as poll workers. And I'm sure we could look into gathering some of those resources, as well. But I know it's definitely a big need for each of these states, and especially if you have a relationship already with your local registrar, you could reach out to them now to see what their needs are, because I know that in my home county, I reached out actually fairly close to the election, and they were still in need of people to work as poll workers. So they're definitely needing more folks at those polling stations.
Yeah, and Campus Compact will be announcing soon a initiative we have to recruit students as poll workers across the country. So some more information will be coming about.
That'll be awesome.
So right now we're going to take time to move into our breakout sessions. I'm going to invite Katie Stewart, our Assistant Director for Campus Compact for Southern New England, to give us directions on how to move over to our breakouts.